All right. Hi, everyone. It's 1 o'clock on my screen, so thought we get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And I guess it's been kind of a rainy day so far for those of you in the DC area. I'm Nikki Yamashiro, Vice President of Research at the Afterschool Alliance, and we're thrilled as an organization to be able to host this webinar for the Roads Taken project, which has been a 6-year-long journey for them, learning about the long-term impacts participation in programs have had on young people. And while their project looks specifically at STEM-focused programs, I think that you'll find a lot of their takeaways, in particular, overall best practices and how and why to stay in touch with your alumni are really universal to after-school programs overall. So there's definitely something to take away for everyone to take away from the webinar today. And with us today are Priya Mobahir and Carrie Tisdale. Their bios are going to get plugged into the chat, but both Carrie and Priya are co-PIs on the Roads Taken project. Carrie has led the qualitative research aspects of the project, and Priya has been leading the work with project partners and both co-leading the project's cabinet and really helping share out these findings with different audiences, which is why we're so thankful to have them with us today. And just quickly, a few housekeeping notes for you. This webinar is being recorded. We're going to be sending a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint deck with everyone who's registered for this. I see a lot of you have done this already, but please introduce yourselves in the chat so we have a better sense of who's in this virtual room with us. And then following up on that, please make sure your chat is set to everyone so everyone can see who's in the room. And then lastly, if you have any questions at any point in time, please plug them into the chat. We've reserved a good chunk of time at the end for Q&A. But before I turn it over to Priya and Carrie, we have a few Mentimeter questions for you all on the next slide. Yes, you can go to menti.com and the code is on the screen and we're going to be plugging it into the chat for you all. It's just a question about the organization that you're affiliated with. I'm going to give folks a little bit of time to get to Mentimeter and to answer the question. It's hard to see on the screen, but when you go to Mentimeter, it'll be easier to see the answer options. We'll see if I'll be able to read the answer options. We just want to see if folks are from a community-based organization, if we have folks from schools in the room, or if you work with a city or town, intermediary. Oh, here are answers streaming in. So some folks from community-based organizations, we have other nonprofit organizations, someone from a school district. Well, it looks like we have a good mix of folks in the room with us today, which is exciting. A lot more other nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations. Okay. Thanks. Okay, and then we have another question on the next slide. It's about dosage, and this is really to get a sense of how often a young person participates in a program. If you're offering a program, it really goes along with the Roads Taken research because they were looking kind of at longevity and participants who participate in programs over multiple years. So it'll help both Carrie and Priya kind of tailor their presentation to folks who are in the room. I see a lot of kind of long-term participation of young people, which is fantastic. But I know their findings can apply to if you have programming operating for a shorter period of time too. And then I think even if we go forward, you can still answer those other questions that we can go back to later. This one's open-ended, so we wanted to hear from you all about kind of what are the long-term impacts or aspirations you have for the young people in your programs? And if you're not a program, if you can share what you hope the long-term impacts are for young people in after-school programs. And this kind of speaks to some of the long-term outcomes and impacts that the Roads Taken project found in their research. And I know this one requires like a little bit more time, so let's see. Start to fill in increased STEM identity. This is going to be a great webinar for you. We'll see a couple of around identity and belonging, supportive relationships with peers, about responsible citizens, SEL, brighter futures, well-being. Yes, I see like common themes around relationships, STEM identity. I see a couple of thumbs up around some of these answers. And I see people are also plugging into chat, which I love too. STEM, life skills, mental health, which are all really relevant for the content that it's going to be talked about today. Well, this is really helpful. Thank you. I think it's going to give Priya and Carrie a lot of food for thought as they're going through their presentation. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Priya to take us through where we're going in today's webinar.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Nikki, and thank you all for just sharing your feedback to let us know who's in the room. It's really nice to have a sense of who the audience is and where folks are coming from and the kind of work that you're doing with young people across the country. So that's been amazing to see. So we just to give you an overview of our webinar, we're going to jump right into it at the beginning, which is we're going to just do a quick takeaways preview. And then we're going to tell you how we got there. We'll go through a description of the project, spend some time on findings, and again, some more detailed takeaways, talk to you a little bit more about process and resources that you can share, and then end with some time for questions and also an invitation for you to share your work in this area and some of the resources you may have developed. You can contact us at this email address, roadstakenresearch@gmail.com, and we'll plug that into the chat if anything comes up that you might want to reach out to us after. So next slide, please. So just to jump right into it, when we're thinking about what we learned from this project or what our takeaways are, there are multiple pathways to long-term impacts and outcomes for youth historically underrepresented in STEM. So the level of program can influence and benefit is different for the multiple pathways. So what we would recommend is programs need to reflect on, program recruitment and move beyond youth that might already be interested or good in a subject. So in our case, moving recruitment beyond just students interested in STEM or good in STEM as potential program participants for your programs. We also learned a little bit, or some key takeaways were some of the strategies that were employed by these programs that led to these outcomes, and the strategies that really came up time and time again. And you'll hear a little bit about how we collected this data. Were teach to learn, learn to teach, where students are developing communication skills, field trips, opportunities to go out beyond the doors of their experience and see what careers and jobs look like in other places. Authentic work experience where they really felt like they were scientists. They really felt like they were contributing back to the organization. And then I'm sure this one won't be surprising to you, this kind of overarching connection and relationship building that happened during their participation in the program. Some of the real high level stuff about keeping in touch with programs alums that we're going to cover are really to think about the benefits to the institutions and the participants. And what we'll get to is like, this is hard work. And there's some strategies that we're going to share with you to both help you re-engage or engage with your alumni, but also for how you organize and collect your data. So next slide, please. So that's what we learned from the project, but what is the project, right? So Roads Taken is really, it is a multi-year NSF-funded multi-program project that really looked at what contributed to the long-term impact on participants. And we looked at participants 15 to 25 years after leaving the program. A lot of the programs that we worked with, and you can see a list of them, the Chicago Botanic Garden, California Academy of Sciences, California Science Center, the New York Hall of Science, the Natural History Museum of Utah, and the Science Museum of Minnesota. The programs at these institutions originated in the Youth Alive project, which was a national endeavor to really engage young people in museums. The target audience for our work and for these programs are youth typically underrepresented or minoritized in STEM. We focused, as Nikki mentioned, on some STEM focused outcomes, but you'll see, again, some of the programmatic strategies and things that come up in our conversation. And another criteria, and why we asked the dosage question, is that these programs engaged young people for more in an intensive way. So 100 or more hours per year, or in multi-year programming. And then again, as we were saying, the learning strategies were really embedded in authentic work. So in a lot of these organizations, the youth were not only participants of the program, but were contributing back or engaging on authentic work experiences at these institutions. This is, as I mentioned, NSF, National Science Foundation funded work through the Center for Research and Evaluation at COSI. So we can go to the next slide. You'll get to hear from me and Carrie a little bit today, but we wanted to take a moment to really just share, in addition to the partners on the last slide, this is our core research team. So we have Deborah Wasserman, who's the PI and senior researcher out at COSI. We have Kit Klein, who's a co-PI and director of Insight for Learning Practices. And then you have Carrie Tisdale, who's a co-PI and director of Tisdale Consulting, and myself. And I know that I saw Kit is also on the call in introductions, and Deborah might also be joining us. And so we're all here to help, bring this project to life. But this has been a journey for all of us. All right, thanks, Deborah, for letting us know you're here. So with that, I will turn that over to my colleague, Carrie. Carrie, you just have to unmute.
There I am. I'm here to share some nuggets of our research studies and things you can take home. And hopefully, if the nugget doesn't have all the dirt brushed off it, you'll put a question in the chat so we can address it. But in general, I'm going to talk about our conceptual model, which was how we thought about the whole situation of people learning and growing in these types of youth programs, and the outcomes to long-term impacts that we included. And what were some other factors like? We looked at status when they entered the program, so we really had an idea of benefit from the beginning to end. I'm going to talk about findings and takeaways. So next slide. Here was our conceptual model, and you'll see all these different categories here. But in terms of long-term outcomes, which you'll see on the upper right, we had an overall measure of involvement in STEM as an adult 15 to 25 years after they participated. But we also looked at how they applied STEM in their academics and career area, in their personal decisions. And you can think about that, about how they thought about vaccines and going to the doctor, buying a car, what they did in family leisure time. All those are personal decisions. Community involvement, what did they do and how did it affect the program, affect that? And STEM identity. And we looked at what the contributions the program made in each of those areas. We also looked at two intermediate outcomes. STEM identity we looked at before the program, right after the program, and as an adult. The other one was we looked at social emotional development. And I saw in the Mentimeter, several of you were interested in aspects of social emotional development. And Deborah has an article that she led on and put together about the social emotional development in this study. And you can find that on our website. Next slide. I also want to point out, these are program strategies. Now, if anybody else used this model, they would need to include what their program strategies are. But I think you may find these are, you could tell us, are these strategies that you could use in your program, or do you not? Not all of you work in programs that are paid authentic work programs. But there are some other areas of authenticity you've got strategies embedded in. It might be a civic, building a park, starting community gardens, earning a badge in an area. But which of these things do you think about? But these were our long-term outcomes. So I hope you'll be able to extrapolate when we show you the findings in each of these areas. Next slide. We're also going to talk about personal characteristics. This study focused on people who were historically underrepresented in STEM. And that is a personal characteristic. And we asked, and how did we define the personal characteristics of people underrepresented in STEM historically? We included women, ethnicity, we included, but women and ethnicity were the main two. We also asked them, we also included how they perceived their program experience. Did they feel like that the experience, did they judge that the experience allowed them autonomy and self-determination as they went through it? Were their needs satisfied in that program? Were there things about the program that they found frustrating? So those are some other characteristics that you will see what we found out about as we continue. Next slide. Here are all the multitude of ways that we collected a multitude of data. And instead, we've been on a 5.5-year journey so far, and we could probably keep analyzing data for another 5.5 years. We had a lot of really good data, and you can see here. But in general, you'll see at the top, our questionnaire is 196. It was a very long questionnaire. But for a lot of the analysis we're going to talk about today, we only focused on the 181 people that were were in the underserved audience. There were about 19 other people who were what we talked about as privileged, and that was generally white male and Eastern Asian, Northern Asian. Anyway, and then we picked down here at the bottom, the last two, is we did interviews about just talking to people about where they'd gone after the program, and some photojournals, which you won't see today. Next slide. Okay, we're going to use the term pathway today. And a pathway, how did we define it? Because even within the project, we were talking about, it took us a while to work out that we were talking about different things. So in the method we use, which I'm just going to throw out there, but we're not going to go into it very deeply, is called fuzzy set QCA, our qualitative analysis. So in these pathways, what you do, it's a method that you think about, well, what are a combination of factors or conditions that'll lead to a specific outcome? So in this example, the outcome is a great garden, and the factors and conditions, this is a simplified example. So we think of, oh, maybe some people may get a lot of information on YouTube, some from books. Good soil and light, we think, might be a factor. And some people might even have a paid gardener. So if you do the analysis, you get multiple pathways to the same outcome. And you can see pathway 1, that's someone who is aware of the contributing to getting to that great gardener, that they got information on YouTube, good soil and light, and a great garden, and that led them to a great garden. But I think you can see all these are different pathways. So pathways in groups, sometimes we use interchangeably, because when we identified a pathway in QCA through that analysis, we can see what kinds of people with what kind of experiences were led to that outcome. Next slide. So, once again, these were people who were historically not represented in STEM academics and careers. And we had 4 pathways to adult overall high STEM involvement. And I'm going to talk about each of these and give you some idea about it. But note that these are 4 groups of people and 4 pathways, and they all led to a measure of adult overall high STEM involvement. But there's a but. There are different benefit levels in each of these pathways, and some of them didn't even attribute the benefits to the same thing. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, I'm not going to read through these, and this is in a handout you get to take home. I'm going to talk about some of the highlights in here. The first bullet says these are all people who identified without entered the program without strong identities and without high STEM identities. So these were people that, you know, you might expect, well, those are going to be people that aren't going to last very long. But this group did last through the program and got to a 3 out of the 4 outcomes, but they had a high dose and they really experienced and valued the self-determined program experiences. And so this is the converted pathway. And I think all of us kind of agree that this is the pathway that we found people with the highest benefit of that the program contributed to. Next slide. Benefiter pathway. These people were a mix of academics. When you said, do you do better, worse, or about the same as your peers in your academics or in your education in high school or in late middle school, there were a mixed group on that. But the program did contribute to their STEM identity. It increased from before the program to after the program and carried on into adulthood. In this group, the program did not contribute to their social emotional development. Now, we don't know why. We think, this is an opinion, it may be that they were a little bit less aware of that, and that it's not something they remembered well. But they also had a high dose. They were there longer and with more frequent attendance, but they also got to that high level. Next slide. Now, this is the STEM enthusiast pathway, an enhanced STEM enthusiast pathway. These were folks that entered with a strong STEM identity. They were the ones the counselor would identify. Oh, this program, I could refer this young person to this STEM program in one of these organizations because I know they're good, they like STEM. This was a group with both high and low academic entering behavior or status. And next, they had high adult STEM identity and social emotional development. So when they were adults, we found this really strong STEM identity in this group, and they replied to the questionnaire items indicating they really had a really strong social emotional development process. High dose again, longer time in the program. And as adults, they had 3 of the 4 outcomes. Next slide. Color. Well, wouldn't you know I would do that? So these are program-free STEM enthusiasts. They entered with high academics. They entered the program with high STEM identity. They saw low social emotional development. They had both higher and lower doses, and they had high levels at the end, but we couldn't attribute them to the program. And I'm going to give you what we think was going on here with this is in the interviews, we did find some people in this group were less comfortable in the program among people with different ideas of STEM than they had. And they were often already knew their careers. And some of these people came from one of our programs that went on into college. And the people entered programs when they already knew they wanted to be science teachers or math teachers. And so that may be some of the lower benefit in this program. It didn't hurt them, but they did not, from entering to their experience as adults, there wasn't as much impact. Next slide. Group pathway takeovers. Remember, I just showed you multiple pathways to the same program, and they were groups that went in there. Next, we want to offer you the idea from this that you need to reflect on your recruitment experiences, and then communicate with your stakeholders. If you're recruiting through community groups, high school counselors, parents, they need to understand who benefits most to this program. Next.
So just before you move on, Carrie, the thing that I would love to just say about this slide is when we're talking about program recruitment, oftentimes I know in our past materials, in our programming, we've said, we've led with the tagline, love science, right? So think about your programs, love engineering, love nature, love art. But what about those students that don't? Right. And so what we're saying is that from our findings, we saw a lot of the impact came from students who didn't innately come in with this relationship and love of the content area, but they're the ones who benefited the most. So it was just this prompt to think about how you are recruiting and how you're messaging so that you're inviting students in who don't naturally see themselves in that space.
And I'll add to that then, what does encourage them to come if they're not in, they don't love science? Well, an authentic experience, a paid position does help. Being associated with your program that may be important in the community, and that just pride. The other really important way of recruiting people is through families, and we found a lot of family groups and taking pride in having. I'm not working I'm not mowing lawns. I'm working at this institution or with this organization. That it's a real motivation to these people who want to feel grown more, if they are growing up. Next slide. Program strategy highlights. I love this. Our STAR strategy that came out in the interviews, it came out in the QCA analysis. This teach to learn within this particular work-based program is just the STAR. And I shared this with a relative in healthcare the other day, and they talked about how this is the skill that they used the most in the healthcare field. It is you teach to learn. So you're learning all this science information, this math or this technology, and then you're going to learn to teach it to people of different ages. And it just has all sorts of connections with other areas of that conceptual framework. Confidence, skill in adjusting communication between adults and children, how to say something to a child, how to say something to an adult. learning new STEM content. It's a way that is, they're not told, no, you got all the practice problems wrong. You learn a script and then you present it and you get feedback from your colleagues that you are ready to go out there and show exhibits on the floor. It is a powerhouse strategy. Field trips were too, and I still want to go on some of these field trips that I heard about. A lot of them were to visit colleges, and it didn't even need to be the college that they applied to. It was just being on a college campus was new for these kids and really had them talking to their friends about it. And it was important in STEM learning. Um, a lot of national park trips about being out in nature, focusing on biology. But it also just built these relationships and future hobbies. Next program highlight. Providing you that authenticity of the work, and I'll do one quote from that. One young person said, and they were from Priya's organization, I just couldn't believe that they put me out there on the floor explaining exhibits to adults and representing the New York Hall of Science. That's a really powerful confidence builder. And the last one is those connections and relationships. We found so many people that are still connected to people who are the adults in their programs. Some are beloved people in their lives, and then people who are still friends. We found two people, one that we happened to interview, one is in California and one is in Washington, D.C., and they bonded in the program and they're still best friends. So, next. Next.
So I
Okay,
think,
my screen froze.
yeah,
Am I
so I think
back
if we
up
were
and
to go back, yeah, we can go back one slide. And I think one of what really pulled this together was the storytelling. And so Carrie, this is kind of the story of Juniper. That's the slide we're on.
Yeah, Juniper illustrates two pathways. People could belong to more than one pathway. She was when we had interviewed her, she was a communication specialist in a charter school. She had not gone back for her degree until for 20 years or 15, until her children started school. But she attributes her communication skills, all these social emotional development areas to the program, and her deep love of nature. And that deep love of nature is also expressed in camping with her family. We found so many of the programs. I'm reading the chat at the same time. Identified STEM parenting, which we thought was absolutely cool. Juniper, she was an average student without strong STEM identity when she attended regularly. And at her school, she was the person in charge of implementing a STEM-based curriculum in her school as a communication specialist. She does not fall in our category of academics and career path, and we'll mention that later. Next. We are still getting these programs together, and we'll let you know on our website, and I think we're going to have all of your email addresses, and when we get those findings out, we'll let you know, because they are very exciting and we have lots of stories to tell. And there is the website, and it's also in the chat, so take it down and you will get this as a handout. Next. I am going to here, as I said, that's where you can find additional resources. You can look at all sorts of things. And then the next slide are some lessons we learned. Here's some lessons, 1, 2, and 3. I'll let you to read at home about what the researchers learned about. We did not like our item that we came up with on STEM related careers. It's either, a yes or a no. Are you in a STEM related career or not? The work landscape has changed since we first started thinking about, and I want us to have a new item. Now, I want to go down here to the last two, because these were what our program partners told us they really got out of this. And to talk about these lessons learned, I'm going to turn it over to Priya.
Great. Before I hit those last two, I just want to come back to that first one that Carrie mentioned in terms of how the kind of STEM landscape has really changed. And the thing that this allows us to also think about and just, question in our own programs is this definition of success that sometimes funders are asking us about. How many students are in STEM degrees? How many students have earned them or in STEM careers? And what we're saying is that success is a little broader than that. And there's other ways of engagement in STEM that we found through this project that are also impactful. One of the things that programs learned the importance of was just keeping good records. And we're going to come back to that. Like, I can't stress that enough. And it might be the tedious part of the work, but it's the one that allows you to get to this information or allow us to conduct this kind of study. And we also learned the importance of staying in touch with alums and beginning to develop strategies for engagement beyond their participation in the program. And I'll talk in just a few minutes about how that that kind of turns into action steps that you can take now.
Next slide. Priya's on.
Oh, great. That was a smooth transition. So one of the things that we've just shared kind of an overview of what we learned from this project. We've highlighted some initial findings. We've talked about the importance of narrative, and then we've given you some key programmatic strategies that we have learned through this research project. But another kind of thing that came out of this project was also the practice and the rigor of how do you find your alums. We had to find them first before we could do any of this work. And so in case we wanted to share some of our own learnings and some resources in case you want to find your alums. And so here's a little bit about what we learned that could potentially help you get started or even continue your journey. So next slide. So why, right? A lot of time, like, we are busy people. Programs take a lot of work, and sometimes you barely have enough time to engage with your program participants as it is. But there are some benefits. In addition, there are some benefits to finding or re-engaging your alums. And when we think about that, we typically think about the programmatic benefits first. So it's thinking about how do we connect, right, our alums to our current participants as potential mentors. They have this shared experience that they can learn from. It also having, that kind of relationships also allows you to understand who your participants are, where they've come from. Are you hitting the audience that you aspire to in your program? And it also helps you make decisions in terms of program evolution, learning, or reflecting on what they got out of the program experience. But it's helpful to zoom out a little bit and think about what are the institutional benefits of re-engaging and finding the alums of your programs. And this really is a capacity building exercise. It's beyond just the programmatic team, and it takes more resources than that, but it allows you to build the story of impact to funders and supporters of the institution and of the program, so that your work can continue. So there are benefits for both the institution and the programs themselves in terms of why engaging and finding your alums is important. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, people are hard to find, even in this day and age of the internet and cyber sleuthing. It's still really hard. We had a group of individuals that really helped track down and identify alums of the program, starting sometimes from names on paper or a name on an application, and then really engaging on some like people finder server or search engines to help find folks. We want to, what we learned from that is just start tracking early, right? Think about what the data is that you want to collect. What's going to help you shape and tell your story? And so, what data can you collect on an application or a survey that you do at the beginning of the program that you just have to keep updated throughout their time in the program, or as they transition to alums. We also learn not to let too much time pass between communications. And so this is specifically communications with alums, and some just strategies that we heard from our partner organizations is, thinking about an alumni, an annual newsletter, or even something as simple as sending birthday wishes, like especially if it's program staff they engaged with. We know turnover is a lot that happens in museums, but sometimes there's longevity there, and utilizing the longevity of those relationships is really helpful. The last highlight for you all is this idea of playing detective is really hard, and it's a skill set. And it's a skill that some of us are good at and some of us aren't, or some of us don't have the patience for. And so it's really thinking about where can you find the internal support in your organizations, in your programs, of people who might already have these skills. And so one example might be on your fundraising or your development team. This is a team that has to do research and collect background information and identify people all the time. And they have tools and practices for doing that. And it's a muscle that they've already been practicing. And so how can you utilize a partnership or relationship with them to help you find your alums, and think about ways of engaging alums in lots of different kinds of activities? Next slide, please. So you find them, and that's great, but you want to stay in touch with folks too, so that you can maintain some kind of communication channel, and that's usually through an email or phone number or an address. And so how do you do that? Instead of just asking folks to like update their information annually, it's thinking about how can you continue to be a resource beyond the program. There might be things your institutions or your organizations or even your programs are doing that you can still invite alums to. And this might be something you already do. So kudos to those that are doing it, because that allows you to leverage the social capital, right? The kind of relationships that your institution or program have built across sectors or fields or with other communities, and allow for networking opportunities that can support your alums in finding a next job or learning about school, and it becomes a benefit to them. When we talk about those relationships re-engage people really quickly or really well. We also, would think about alumni events to welcome them back to the organization. If you are a program that has a physical place, and being in a place or a location has some sentiment to it, it's great to re-engage them with the physical space as well. I mentioned this before, but leveraging those relationships with program staff and participants. So one of the things that we did is, if we had alum from that period that we were looking at still on staff, we just asked, who are you keeping in contact with? Do you mind sending an email for us? Just to re-engage or make an introduction. And then what we learned through our many conversations is that the alums across programs were really interested in what's currently happening in the program. Are they still doing some of the program activities that they did in the past? Do they have these kinds of shared experiences? And so these are some of the, just suggestions and recommendations. And I'm sure there's a breadth of things that you're doing beyond some of these recommendations as ways to continue your alumni engagement. Next slide, please. So we're starting to collect this data. We're starting to re-engage with people. But at some point, I mentioned that turnover sometimes in our organizations is real. And one of the things that we learned is that data sometimes lives with people rather than living in programs. And so when we're thinking about data collection strategies, it's really thinking about what are the methods that you can utilize to standardize the information that you're collecting. And so it's creating a base template with definitions about your database or about the form or the tool that you're using to collect data, so that everybody understands what's going into this, the database with fields. So if you are running a multi-year program, for example, and you have an annual start date, we know that when we put start date in a database, it means this one thing. And maybe we're adding fields for other things, but that anyone coming in to add information in the future will know that start date means this one thing, instead of me, Priya, who might want to put the start date of every year of the program in that field, which will then, complicate the data. So having a centralized place where you can identify the data you want to collect, define it, but also identify where your sources is going to be really helpful in terms of organization and sharing that knowledge with other program staff. So for us, it might be contact with participant. As you can see, this is just a snapshot of our definitions. For some of it, it might be, through historical records. So imagine this as application. Imagine this as annual alumni engagement survey. These are regular places that you can utilize to upkeep your information. We also would highly recommend just updating it regularly and storing this database with a program leader or leaders. Like, we recommend multiple people or in a shared location. So for our example, for NISI, we use Google Drive as our backbone. And so this becomes a shared drive so that if any one person leaves, that information is still consistent and stays with the program. Next slide, please. And so now you have collected data, you've engaged your alumni, everyone has a fantastic story to share with you. What do you do with this updated data? And again, this is just for your program. You might be doing this individually. And so one of the ways that you can utilize this data is to think about what are other local groups of programs that we can share so that we can look at our impact as a group. So for example, if we're working in after school programs under 4-H, are there other sites that you can share data with? So if we're looking at a region, we're combining that data and you can now shift your storytelling and shift your narrative from a location or a site to a broader location. So you can tell a larger story, or you can also compare data to better understand like some of the program strategies or the audience that you're working with. I wouldn't, do our program justice if I didn't say that upkeep of your data allows you to participate in future research studies. We, with the Roads Taken project, were able to answer a lot of questions and really set up a foundational way of reflecting on program impact, but there's so much more to come. And thinking about how are you creating kind of infrastructure and process and getting ready for some future research, I think is also like a great product of something we learned coming out of this project. And lastly, it's really thinking about how do you tell the story of your program participants? So oftentimes I know, and we've done it here too, is that we share narratives. And narratives are really, really impactful. But so are numbers and so are data. And being able to consistently track your data and add to reports that you work, like 85% of your community come from minoritized backgrounds, 90% come from a target key demographic area that you aspire to work with. It's really helpful to be able to quantify some of that information and to have a centralized place that your program team can also have access to it. So next slide, please. So coming out of this, some of the things that we're in the process of developing is really some tips and tricks about getting started on your alum tracking journey. And that would represent when we were getting ready to train teams across these different institutions, we did a 4-part training series. And so what we're doing is consolidating that 4-part training series into this tips and tricks document, and also just creating a data and definition template of some of the data that we collected with definitions, but also something that can be utilized by other programs as a starting off place. So I think with that, I'll say next slide because I'm unsure of what the next slide is. Oh, perfect. Now we're right at, thank you, Lucy. We're right at the Q&A portion of our program. And I know that we have some questions in the chat, but I also recognize that amazing work is happening across fields, across programs. And there might be a lot of things that are being developed or that you all are thinking about and are working on that we would love to learn from as well, right? So we're all part of a learning community. And so I would just invite you, if there are other programs or initiatives or tools that are being utilized in the community that's here today, we'd love to have you share that in the chat, as well as any questions that you have about our presentation today. Great.
Well, while you're typing them in, I want to add one thing about this sharing of data. Another thing it would be helpful if you put in the chat is Deborah's already sharing this conceptual framework and way of studying things at another science center. But we really think it would probably work in long-term programs like 4-H and Girl Scouts, and even to the help of one of the questions from an advisor we had is about, well, how do we get more people in our 4-H programs? So we'd love if you would be interested in collaborating on some of those things, put it in the chat. We've Deborah and Kit submitted a proposal for a research collaborative, and it didn't make it, but that's only one try on it, and we might find another funder. And if you're interested in collaborating, put it in the chat and we'll tag you in our database.
Great. So Carrie, just to get kicked off on some questions, on a question here is, what did the interviews specify about out of school time educators that contributed to the long-term engagement in STEM or development and STEM identity? So just specifically, what did the educators do in facilitating the STEM program that was supportive?
Okay, I want to give you one specific example, because I had someone that I interviewed that really, he had gone in high academics, high STEM, but he was in a minority group, and he's the one. Here's going to be our physics researcher. He's the dean of students at a well-known West Coast college, because he wanted to give back to the community and he felt that he could do it. So anyway, my conversation with him is, do you need to have, how much do people leading the programs need to be people of color and women? And he said that for him, he didn't think the leaders that was important, but more important were having people that the young people, they really knew that these people in these roles cared about them and would have conversations with them at lunch about their plans, and knew that they really were interested in their future. And I identified with that, because as a high school teacher, I thought it wasn't important whether or not they liked me. It was important that each one of them knew that I liked them, no matter what their achievement level. That's a developmental level in that middle school and high school area, where adults who are not your parents become very important to you, and you probably think back on that. So it's really having empathy and being able to interact with and talk to people. Set boundaries and structures, but those are really beloved people in the lives of the people that from the interviews. It's not just from that one interview, it was a pattern. I hope that answered it. Priya, do you have any things to add on that?
I would just reinforce again having facilitators that come from the same communities and backgrounds as the students was a really impactful strategy, and something that we heard come up time and time again, just even from program leads that were participating in the project themselves. So having shared experiences, I think, was really valuable. There's another question from Anita I'm going to just say your question out loud, but I know that it is going to take us a little bit more to answer it. But I just want to share it in terms of just this learning community. So in the CS initiative at the Afterschool Alliance, one of the central beliefs is centering STEM as a tool to support high school students in their own interest or tackle issues that they care about in some way that lead to impacts. Was there did we see a strategy in this kind of strategy in any of the programs? And if so, could we disaggregate the impacts of these kinds of this type of engagement from others? So because this would have us, we would have to take a look to kind of answer that. But I don't know, Carrie, if there's anything quickly you want to say about that.
Yeah, I want to say that I think what's generalizable from this study to community engagement that has an impact is authenticity, learning the processes of having community impact. So it's a real responsibility. Yes, it's something they're interested in, and that's motivating, but it's also really keeping it authentic, whether you're going to volunteer to talk to the city council about keeping a park open in a neighborhood. That might be an example of that, but it is, and making sure they have the support and some training and previous experiences before you put them online of how to present information. That presenting and communicating was probably one of the highest benefits that people came forth with in the interviews. Is this gave me confidence, but people had training and experience before they were put on the front line of the authentic work. And there's a lot of authenticity to those situations that you're talking about, Anita. But you also need to think about the other side of how do you prepare people to be successful in authentic work. PowerPoints, not talking as much as I do on each slide. All those kind of things are important. And that's my take on how generalizable this study is to the initiative that you are working with.
Great. So I'm just taking a look at the time, and we do have one more question for you before. So please keep your questions coming. We will definitely follow up after this with materials and answers to the best of our ability. But if you were just to move to the next slide, we want to know what a key takeaway is for you. What's something that you're walking away with from today's webinar? So we're utilizing the Mentimeter again. This is something that you can continue. We'd love to see some of the responses as you're kind of transitioning to your next meeting or event, because we want to learn about what's working and how we can best continue to sharing this information. So I'm seeing in the chat lots of opportunities for collaboration, lots of interest in really continuing to think about future work. In the chat, we're also just saying how to keep track of alums. Yeah, that's a really important one. So as we're seeing things come in, the importance of keeping in touch with alums, the importance and value of alum connections to enhance current cohorts and long-term outcomes, ideas on how to benefit alums post-program, right?
Yeah.
Strategies for communicating with alums. So there's a lot, just a lot in terms of just why that's still an important audience for us as practitioners. That's the importance of being intentional with your efforts and the program strategies that you might be utilizing. I added a little bit to that one. Different strategies to collect data and creating a database that can continue to live with the organization. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. We look forward to diving in and just continuing to look at that. So Nikki, I hand it back over to you.
I have one final thing that I want to say on this is the Alliance has been such a wonderful partner. They have helped us with our dissemination in so many ways, in such great support. And one thing was they mentioned another idea today is that if we've got leftover questions, we'll have them, and we may issue an FAQ, a Q&A FAQ, and collate them and send that out to you so you can get the answers to additional questions after the program. And we'll get Kit and Deborah involved in that too. So, but I do want to close with a thank you to you for coming taking out your important time and thinking with us about how this study crosses over into different areas and applies to you. But I also want to issue a real sincere thanks to the Alliance and to Nikki, who's our representative and her spectacular comms team.
Oh, thanks so much, Carrie. No, we really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank Priya for all of your great work, for taking the time to share your lessons that you learned with us. And yeah, echoing the thanks to everyone who joined the webinar today. From the responses in the Mentimeter, it seems like you're able to walk away with something useful to your work. And yes, like Carrie said, we're going to be sending an email with the link to the webinar, this recording of the webinar, the PowerPoint presentation, resources mentioned today. And yes, if you have any additional questions, please let us know. We'll send them to the Roads Taken team and we'll send answers. But yeah, with
One
that,
of our alums is on the chat. The alum liaisons from one of our organizations is on the chat. All right. Hi, Jazeera. That's a lovely, we became so fond of all these people working on that. I interrupted and I will turn I'll mute.
okay, no, that's a great shout out. And yes, thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for joining. We're right over 2 o'clock, so we'll give people back their time. But thanks everyone and hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.